on the bike.
Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get started on the meeting. We're here to talk, do we have an agenda, or is that the only thing on the, that's the only thing on there?
This is our agenda.
Oh, okay, Emergency Communications Operations Center. Okay, Joanne, go ahead and get started.
Yes, sir. When we talked about this, we moved it up a couple of weeks because of the build of the ordinance that's on tonight to move emergency communications radios, which is under Dwayne, over to the department. I think all of those questions have been answered, and also then about the consolidation of dispatch in January. So I think at least councilmen, as we left that meeting, were saying, so we're just going to talk about the building tonight unless you have other questions. So basically what we were going to do tonight is Jennifer's going to go back through the master plan that Ross and Virazzini, very briefly, yes, I know you guys have already sat through that. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about, when we did the master plan, we thought we were going to use a traditional approach of do a master plan, send that to an architect, and come up with an architectural and engineering plan, and then put it out for bid. But in talking with St. Louis County about their experience in doing design build versus design bid build, they've had such a better experience on delivering on budget and delivering on time that we've spent some time exploring that. So Corey and Greg are prepared to talk to you a little bit about that. If we were interested in that, we would have to put an ordinance in place that would allow us to do that, because it's not
a design bid build?
Design build.
To do
We have
design build.
authority to do design bid build.
All right.
So we're going to do that, and I know that you guys also have some questions about, the rating, EF rating on the building and all that, so we can talk about that as well. So unless you want a different order, we're just going to start.
Joanne, what was that number, example you gave me on the two buildings when they started?
Yeah, St. Louis County, when we went over and visited with them, they started their EOC, which some of you have seen, and their health building at the exact same time. They finished their health building, which was a more expensive building, on time, 2 years earlier than their EOC. And the health building was design build. The EOC was done as a design, then bid and build. So they also just renovated their courthouse in a major renovation using design build. Instead, they all have their challenges. I'm not saying any of it's without challenges, but they said they've had a much better experience than in major renovations before. So. Do you all know Jeff Smith, who's head of emergency communications, as we'll be calling it, currently dispatch alarm? You know the chief. This is Karen Oakley, who's the civilian or head of, now that we've moved the lieutenant back to working the street, of communications for the police department right now. So I'll start.
Okay. So this is a lot of the information you saw last year as it relates to the master plan. So I'll move quickly, and you also have the larger versions of this in the document that is the full master plan document that was emailed to you all a couple of weeks ago. So again, just kind of the refresher of the purpose of that master plan document was to identify what our current space challenges were, our current space needs, and help us design a means of moving forward that would help solve any of those issues for us in a way of going about it. Again, focused largely on space requirements and adjacencies. So the folks who will be going into the building or have a stake in the facility will be that new emergency communications department. So fire, EMS dispatch, police dispatch, Dwayne Kinley and the radio staff, the police department's division of emergency management who man the EOC. And then our information systems department will likely have a large data center presence in that facility, and then also facilities maintenance will need to be a player as we go through in designing of the building, as they'll have responsibilities for maintaining it. So again, we're looking at a site on TR Hughes that backs up to the police department and the church and ball fields adjacent to the police department. It's a total of about 10 acres. As some of you are aware, there's a property available for sale to the right of the police department in that image. That is, some may have some interest in potentially using that site. I know Councilman Cronin had some conversation about that last week. On the site, the 10 acres that we do own, the proposed site layout would be to locate the emergency communications facility on the western side of that property, allow for some connectivity into the police department site, and space for future build-out of potential storage facilities or any other potential use on the property. And then our big requirements in terms of what we wanted to have in this new building are really meeting space. Again, it's difficult to be able to hold any type of larger meeting of county government anywhere west of First Capitol and I-70. Space for training, both for the dispatchers, for emergency management, for the police department, and really any county function. An ability to use a space within that facility as a joint information center, which could serve as a call center if we needed to man a large number of telephones, and then also provide a better location for a larger media response and monitoring, which is also space we don't have today. Also on that list is the on-site media room, space that we do have within the police department today that we would want to turn back over to other police department uses and move the media room within this particular facility. Have something where if this becomes a 24/7 operation, it's scalable for food preparation so people can stay there on site. One of the key areas that those of you who visited St. Louis County saw a space for sort of policymakers, decision makers to have some meeting space that's separate from where the folks in boots on the ground are manning and operating the positions within the Emergency Operations Center, and then needing a hardened data center for the radio project. Briefly on this, we obviously have a lot of technology. We'd want to go into that facility, ability for cellular communications, improve connectivity, and with a tower site that's located also on that property, and some video conferencing capabilities that we don't have at this type of appropriate scale today. So brief rundown of the building sort of adjacencies laid out for us by Ross and Berrezzini, who did the master plan. Move quickly through this. That circled area there first is kind of those shared uses throughout the building, so a media room, training rooms, and then shared space for restrooms, locker rooms, and laundry facilities. Highlighted here on the right in the green areas, the Emergency Operations Center and the Emergency Management staff spaces. Also accounted for within the space requirements here are 500 square feet. I can't see that smaller number on that particular page for potentially sharing some space with the city of O'Fallon. As part of their build out right now, their new police department, they're contemplating whether they want to build out a larger emergency operations center, or if they'd want to combine space and share some of those resources with us. So we've tentatively allocated a couple hundred square feet where their offices could be located, and they'd have access to all of that space in green as well for their uses if they were stood up and county's not. And then also gives them some space to be able to come and utilize that alongside a county operation. Left-hand side is the radio space, so those rows of boxes in the middle would be the data center space for the radio staff and IT staff who would be working out of that location or would need temporary place to be able to sit and work. Mechanical spaces throughout the building are all in gray on that left-hand corner and then also in the upper left corner as well. Oops, I should have done all of those for you, sorry. Second floor space is allocated for the dispatch facilities, so police, fire, and EMS would all be on the second level, and space allocated for staff on that level as well. Again, we've been pushed to 1.5-story, 2-story arrangement on that parcel in order to achieve certain setbacks from the road and neighboring properties, which forces you into a very long facility, which we could not achieve on one floor there. With the amount of space requirements that we have built into the building. Corey may be able to touch a little bit more on that and how that might be reconfigured potentially depending on how our needs have changed since this was completed in August of 2014.
Is this all below grade, Jennifer?
No, none of this is below grade.
Just even the first, even the
Correct.
lowest level?
Correct. They had originally, when we started out the master planning process, recommended having a portion of the facility below grade, but we were looking at utilizing just that original 6 acres that we had purchased, which is a much hillier portion of the property, at which point they were recommending that. Once we acquired the additional 4 acres and have more space on that property, it was their recommendation to move to the other end of the parcel in order to give us more flow, potential, and growth of the police department, and leave that on the eastern side of the property and this facility on the west. And then they suggested making all of this at grade.
Do you know what the square footage is of all 3 floors, or 2 floors, or 3 floors?
40,000.
Okay, so you got an acre under roof.
41,460.
And you got, not quite an acre, and you got 10 acres there?
Correct.
Okay. And, you know, setbacks, you can, I think we can get variances for those. We know somebody on planning and zoning might be able to get that done.
The setbacks we're aiming for are related to, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's,
ATFP, it's the anti-terrorism force. It's a blast radius for if you have a terrorist attack, you have to have the building set back from the property line so many feet. And right now, St. Louis County, if we compare them, they're at 180 feet, and we can only get 80 feet with the way we're set up with 2 stories.
They got a chain link fence you can drive a car through. Okay,
Yeah,
for what
but
it's
they,
worth.
they've got landscaping set up, that it's in the design, supposed to be the landscaping with the hills and the boulders set up to where if you got through the fence, it'd take a major 4x4 vehicle to make it through to the building.
I think you'd take a pickup truck with 4-wheel drive. Okay, I was there, so.
It didn't look
Yeah.
like much, did it? Didn't look like much to get to
No,
the
it
front door.
wasn't much. It was,
But
I think the only importance of that is that if there are dollars available, that if we are rated in that way, we'd want to be able to take advantage of those.
Sure.
If the feds aren't investing in that at the time, then that's something we could look at getting the waiver for. But right now, that's the reason for the way they've got it cited on the property, is they're trying to get that 80-foot blast zone in the master planning that Ross and Birazini did so far.
so Corey's going to take over to address some of your questions that you all had related to weather and other events, as well as a budget. And all ready to try and just overcome the Councilman Klinghammer threshold. If you go to your second piece of paper in your
This
packet
is,
is the zoomed-in
blow up
version
right
of the
behind it.
next chart that you're
No,
going to
not-
see.
Look at the
That's
next piece of paper.
much more
Here,
legible.
yeah.
We're not supposed to be able to read this one, are we?
No,
Correct.
it's,
All right,
it's
We're
the,
good.
right.
thank you.
all right, just to start out, we got the project budget we're all looking at now. You can see that they've roughly got $28 million set aside for the 41,000 square foot building. What I really wanted to touch on here is 2.04 is the building construction. They show $9.5 million for the structure and the envelope. That's based off a EF4 rated building. We have the option, depending on what we want to do, to either move down to an EF3 or move up to an EF5, and that comes with a 10 to 15% increase or decrease in that budget number there. So I just showed you an EF5 would be roughly 10.6 million, and an EF3 would be 8.3 million, just to kind of show you what our options are. On the next page, I'll kind of get into the classifications of tornadoes so you can see where we're at and how we got there. I wanted to point out, though, that the classifications of tornadoes changed in 2007 from an F series to an EF. That's kind of important when we look at the history of these tornadoes, because the EF4 has speeds, it shows here, of 166 to 200, and an F3 has speeds of 162 to 209. So really, the older F3 is equivalent to today's EF4 from my brief research on it. So it's going to look a little lopsided when we're recommended an EF4, and the major history is in F3s, that they're actually fairly similar weather events. This next page is the full chart showing you the wind speeds and the different ratings. And you can see there the F3, the EF4 comparisons are very similar. To give you a history of St. Charles County's tornado, we were able to pull up the history from 1883 up to 2013, and we have 7 of the F3 tornadoes. There's been 1 F4 tornado, plus there was also an additional EF3 tornado, which is equivalent to the F4, back on May 31st of 2013. So we've had a total of 9 tornadoes that are greater, or F3 or greater, since 1883. And we've had a total of 35 additional tornadoes on top of that. And that's, I believe, where Ross and Berrezzini got the recommendation for the 180 mile an hour wind speed to give us our EF4 rating. So that's what they built their budget off of, is that EF4, and based off this history here. The next slide is showing all of the F3, F4, and EF3 tornadoes that have gone through the county. You can see they vary drastically in their track, or how far they've ran. You can see we have anywhere from 3 miles up to 53 miles on one tornado, from when it touches down to when it's dissipated and gone. Gives you a nice history of the county's tornadoes and how we've got to where we're at now. Is there any questions regarding the history of tornadoes within the county, or why it was recommended for an EF4 rating? Good.
Look at it, I'm just curious. Surrounding counties, or like in Illinois, or, you know, because those things move around. Is there worse ones in Lincoln County or worse ones in Illinois? On this?
It's fairly similar. I do have a full history here of the St. Louis region.
What was Joplin?
The tornado went through
Yeah.
Joplin?
Yeah.
I don't remember for sure. I think that
Was
was,
5?
was it a 4?
Well, it hopped, as Jeff pointed out, it hopped and went. And they had a lot of flat land, we're kind of hilly, they're just flat. And then, so it depends on how they picked up the rate, as Jeff pointed out. Some call it a 4, some call it a 5. I think if it's declared a 5, it just depends on where you were, what it was.
Yeah, I'm not very up to date on building, but why would a building increase more than $1 million depending on the rating? I mean, what can they do to a building that would, move it from, this to that?
They increase the structure of the building itself, the reinforcing of the steel structure. They provide extra steel support, so if there were partial collapses, the building can retain itself. They increase the envelope of the building itself, especially in the glazing. They increase the wind rating of the glass, what the glass can retain. It's really building that outer shell, so it's almost like a bunker that's upright in the air. But the higher you go up, the bigger portion is the partial collapse, to be able to collapse part of the building and the rest of the building still stand.
But if you shielded 3 sides of that building with earthen berms, you'd only have to worry about that on one side. And the second question I have is, how does 40,000 square foot stacked up 2 or 3 stories tall compare in construction costs to one 40,000 square foot building on one level? And like in St. Louis counties, there were windows that were protected from storms and windows that weren't, because they ran out of money and they only could protect the side that faced the storms, which made no sense to me.
No.
So, if you look at like Troop C, the old Troop C headquarters in 61, they built that thing where it's encased pretty much on 3 sides. That would lower your construction cost considerably, would it not?
I think it would lower your outer envelope, but it won't lower your structure. We still have to have the structure itself to be able to withstand. But yeah, it'll decrease the amount of glazing you have on the building and lower the envelope that's exposed to the weather events themselves.
Your pressure comes from uplift too, though, so it's gonna, even if it's got berms around it, you're still got the uplift pressure. And that's what gives your FM ratings and all that other stuff. And it blows out the walls too. It doesn't, just not the force of the wind, it's also the suction.
Tornado hit my steel building in downtown back in the 80s. I guess it was 84, 80, I don't remember the year. I remember rebuilding places. I guess it was the 80 tornado. We found pieces of half-inch plate glass stuck in the back wall 120 foot away. It hit on a Sunday, so nobody was killed. But the steel structure and the concrete block structure, took it and tore the hell out of everything else in downtown, but it was a steel and concrete block building.
I think the other part of that, though, is it's not just the building can take it, is it a safe environment for the people inside the building to be able to not have to hunker down and disappear to a small portion of the building if they're answering calls for the dispatch or to be able to operate out of that building and not tell them they have to go take shelter.
Well, you can't, I don't think you can stack a building either, though, and get the, again, you either gotta put it in the ground real far, which is gonna be expensive, or it's gonna be sticking way up, and then the wind uplift is enormous the higher you go. And
This is a multi-story building on top of a high area with a lot of flat ground right on the other side of 79.
no, but I think you were
Yeah,
asking them, why aren't they stacking it rather than spreading it out?
No, I think it'd be
No,
better to
you said
spread it
spread it
out,
out.
the opposite.
Oh, I see.
It's already, it's a two-story now, so
We looked at that. This building site, the piece of property that's purchased, is a little over 300 feet wide and 900 feet long. And right now, they have a setback of only 80 feet on either side, and that's where they were going for that ATFP rating. And I mean, really, we need, they told me roughly an 800-foot wide piece of land to be able to spread it out and to keep all their ratings. That other piece of property that's just to the right of the police station, that one's about 450 foot by 450 foot square, the mass area without the little L shape going out. So there's a little benefit to that, but I don't know if there's enough to stretch it out into one story. But it's something we can, I
I
mean,
guess you'd have to weigh the savings of construction costs versus the higher price for land acquisition.
yes.
It's all trade-offs.
And if I may, the key is, they have to continue business in this. They don't run and hide, they stay and work, so we gotta build it right, we gotta build it strong enough. The dispatch line's not gonna run, the emergency manager's not gonna run, they're gonna stay in there, and if you folks are there also, we gotta keep doing business, and we gotta have faith in this building, so we built it strong enough the first time.
And the
All right.
other, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
The other piece of it, and I agree with the chief, I mean, the human factor of asking dispatchers to stay in place, you can't ask people to do their job, knowing that you're not giving them a safe enough environment. And I know, I mean, one of the fine-tuning decisions we have to make is at which, relative wind speed are we trying to hit the appropriately safe place. But also, we have the data center for the radio system, as you know, which we've spent millions on, and we also have the county data center. Those aren't systems we're gonna wanna lose. I mean, if we're gonna put them in this building, it's gonna be so that we have some relative security that system and all of the data is secure. And so it's not only people, it's also not having to find multiple locations to back up and pay those annual costs for duplication of the data systems. So,
All right, John, I got a couple questions. Have we had the conversation of, okay, this looks, all this is fine, but why do we need this? I mean, why do we, if someone asks a question, why are we spending $60 million? You got 33 million for this and then 23 million for the radio, so in all, you're in $60 million at the end of the day.
okay.
Why are we doing that?
So, and I appreciate those of you who had the time and were able to join us. I know some of you couldn't, but if you'd like to go back and take the tours at any point, we can rearrange that. It's really two factors. At dispatch out in Wentzville, we are simply out of space. We have done everything we can in that building to come up with dispatch floor space, with staff space, with places to train, with the guts of the equipment that is out there, and we're simply out of space. There's no growth potential whatsoever. There's no synergy of trying to run off of a single floor, cross-train and be able to use staff more appropriately in the future. So the building's out of space, and I know a number of you have been out here and seen that. With regard to the EOC, as again, those of you who've had the chance to see it, and I would hope the rest of you hopefully would be able to in the future, what we have is very minimal staff in kind of a bad working situation. We're underneath the jail, which was done at the time for very secure reasons that, as Corey was referring to, if you had a partial building collapse, it was very safely in the ground and wasn't going to get disturbed by any storm. In fact, they don't even know if there's a storm going on unless they have the roof monitor on and they can see what's going on outside. But on the other hand, the water pipes of the jail are above them. 30 years of inmate use and toilets being jammed up, and all of that has meant that they've suffered water event after water event. We lost all the radio equipment in there about 10 years from a major water event during a construction issue. There's very little room in terms of operation on a day-to-day basis for staff to operate in. If we actually have to operationalize the EOC, there's basically a table about double the width of what you're at and a little bit longer for all the agencies to come in and coordinate at.
Are we gonna
So-
sell the communications building in Winsville or just keep
I would
it?
anticipate that we would.
I was at that building about 4 years ago. We were elbow to elbow.
No, I know it's small.
And that building, when we took the tour, the existing emergency communications department is in a hole in the basement of that building. And we need something better than that. That was pretty eye-opening. You could see it.
I mean, you need the space. What you're saying is you need the space. You're just gonna make it better, make it safer for when we build it anyway, right, basically?
Right.
We also want to make it more productive. Currently now, if we have an event and the government comes down there, we meet with you in the garage. There's no place for you to meet inside the Emergency Operations Center. When that last tornado come up Highway 40, had it crossed the highway, we would have lost our communication. Jennifer has traveled, done all kinds of research. I mean, we're concerned, we're trying to keep it cost effective. Corey's been on this. I mean, we've seen some Taj Mahals. That's still on our radar. We took some folks with us. We looked at some that are good or some are bad. We need something productive, some that'll work, so we still can conduct government, protect our assets, and protect our citizens.
Joanne, thanks, Dave. On the counties of our size, is this a typical scenario? I mean, this what we're proposing?
St. Louis County is, as you know, bigger than us, but theirs is 32,000 square feet. So it's a little bit smaller. They are already complaining. The dispatch side says they're happy, but the Emergency Operations Center is already very unhappy. They have no storage space whatsoever built into the building. They're already asking for what could amount to hundreds of $1,000s of changes to the building.
Are any of the other charter counties doing this on the other side of Missouri?
Well, not a charter county, but Greene County Springfield built
They're about
one,
the same size as we are.
right? That is way bigger than this, but they built it as a regional asset, and it's also the backup for the state if the state gets hit.
Do you know what Joe was asking? Do you know how much St. Louis County spent on their building?
I do.
Can you say?
Can you explain that?
That's like, hey, what
Yeah.
time is it?
No.
But you know what time it is?
The only
I
reason I
do.
was hesitating is I asked that when we were over there, and they showed me a chart, and I said, can I have a copy of that? And they said no.
Okay.
So,
Well, here's one of the things that
but there is some analysis that Corey can give you on that.
when we were on that tour, if you go to what is our Emergency Operations Center and you walk through there and you see the table that's laid out and you see where everybody is sitting and you just imagine, okay, if there's a disaster that goes on, if we need to get all the players who need to be in here all together, there's not enough chairs to go around the table. There's not enough room at the table to put the chairs around it. So you have people working over your back to reach through to get to stuff. You can't communicate effectively. You go out of this room and into this room, and that's where your dispatch is. You can only put a couple dispatch people who are actually in there. And when you go down the hall and you look at the equipment room, it's like an old Radio Shack, or for me, it looks like an old radio engineer's workbench is where everything is stored. And it's like, okay, that's our emergency. That looks really bad. And it kind of puts a bit of fear into you when you go, how have you managed to make this work? And the folks who have really need to be commended as to how they've made that situation work. I mean, it's one of those things where I had to, therefore I did. You didn't have any other choice. But when we went over and we looked at St. Louis counties, A, that's a gorgeous building. B, it's not nearly as functional as they would have liked for it to be. And they're talking about building a 10,000 square foot storage building out back because he said, hey, would you like to see our storage facility? And he opened up a closet and said, that's our storage facility. Because they didn't do this before they built that. And they talked to people like us about, hey, what kind of building you want to have? And they didn't talk to people like him and said, hey, what kind of building do your dispatchers need? What kind of building do your people need when there is an emergency? The way they have those tables laid out in the big room, where you have monitors at all the tables, so all the folks who are in this little group who need to work together can sit at the same table and talk to each other. They can have a monitor where they can plug in a laptop, they can plug in headphones, and they can all hear what's going on, just particular on that. They have all the monitors up for the news media so they can see what's going on in terms of, hey, here's a weather radar, here's a news report, because people are out feeding stuff in all the time. They also have a way to bring in news feeds that when people are out shooting stuff, they can feed it back through, and they can bring up web feeds from just individuals who are out doing reports. And they can bring it all back in, so everybody who needs to be informed can be in the same room, they can effectively talk, they can effectively make decisions, and it's like, okay, this is how it's supposed to look. And then you go back to where we are, and you're like, wow, I never felt poor until I went to the rich neighborhood. And then it's like, how do we manage to get this done? But I will tell you, Jennifer's, from what we've learned from her, just going through that tour and talking to the guys over at St. Louis County, there's a lot of things that we could do, but I think they've done a really nice job of doing the groundwork of figuring out, okay, we could do this, but we could also get away with this. So rather than build the Taj Mahal that looks fantastic, we're getting an effective building that gives us everything that we need to have without going crazy on it. So at least from everything that I've seen so far, I think we've hit a pretty happy medium.
I think so too. And the other thing, we need to look not just for what we need today, but for what we're going to need for the next 25 or 30 years. Because that goes by in a blink of an eye. As I get older and older, 20 years seems like a long time, but it's nothing. And looking forward to where we're going to be 25, 30 years from now, this kind of space, is it a lot more than what we have? Oh yeah, it is. But you project out the growth rates that we've had, and it looks like that's going to continue. There's still an awful lot of land that can be developed for more housing. We're going to need it. I don't think there's any doubt about it, and nothing takes less space at all. It all takes more, even with all the miniaturization of all the radio equipment that we have, it still seems to take more room to operate it. So
The nice part about that tour also is we got a nice regional view of how tracking weather events happens that I never thought of. Some of you may, but I never really thought about the fact of, hey, before this hits St. Louis City, it's going to hit St. Louis County, it's going to hit St. Charles, it's going to hit Warren County. So that stands to reason. But watching how they use this to talk together, to plan together, to track together. So as they pick up the storm, as it's moving its way, because it always seems to come up 44 for some reason. I don't know why. So as it comes up that way, they track this thing, and when Greene County's tracking it down there, they're handing the information up. We're handing it off to St. Louis County. They're handing it off to St. Louis. They're handing it off to Illinois. And just watching that work regionally was pretty amazing. We're not really in a place to make full use of that yet, but as we get this new facility online, the way we're going to be able to respond to things is night and day from where we are right now, at least from everything I've been told. As long as it works the way it's supposed to, it looks really cool.
Okay, Corey, let's move on. We're running out of time.
All that expensive new radio equipment is in the basement of the jail, and every time a bad boy misbehaves upstairs, that water comes down. That's one thing I saw right off the bat. And just St. Louis counties, I wasn't impressed at all. It's a beautiful building. I would never built anything like that. It's pretty. They made a lot of mistakes. One of the things that they really did, I want to point out, they did not talk to the people that used the building at the architectural level. And we heard that loud and clear from those guys. The guys were telling us that they did all kinds of stuff, like the storage issue Mike brought up, okay? They didn't talk to people using the building. So the dialogue between his staff and his staff and the folks that designed that building needs to be ongoing and continuous. So I think we're going to repeat the mistake St. Louis County did.
Okay,
I know
Corey.
you want to move on, but can I just quickly finish answering your question about
No,
why
that's
we
fine.
need it?
It's a question that needed to be, but that's good.
I know, but just really quickly, we're, to finish up about the EOC, we're right now not experiencing huge jail population increases, but the jail's 30 years old, and we are increasing certain types of needs. We have a lot more mental health, a lot more drug, a lot more medically involved clients. And so we are right now, we'll be coming back to you in the next couple of months with a master plan that Corey's been overseeing with corrections at the jail about not stuff we all need to do right now, but fitting that piece that we are working on with the medical and booking and the central control into it, but a long-term plan for what are the additional things that we could do at the jail to increase capacity. And there is a use also for this space as part of that master plan if we have to do that. And finally, and I know, the last piece of why we need this is that when we built the radio system, we really didn't have a place to appropriately put that high-tech, very expensive master switch and all of the core equipment. And so working with Rocky, we got a 5-year waiver to shore up the 3rd floor of the admin building. But long-term, it doesn't meet the needs of if that building did catch fire, how long would that survive, giving the firefighting crews time to get to it before that collapse. So eventually, we're supposed to get that equipment out of there and into appropriately sized and protected space for that. So just wanted to remind you of that. So that answers that question. So the next phase of it that we
One
want.
more question, is it the earthquake, is that gonna be a high rating on that as well, equal to the E4?
The design?
Yeah, for the
Yeah,
earthquake.
they designed it moderately, not too severe. You can see the probability of within 50 years and within 100 years, we're still in a low probability of that. I just wanted to show you that we're on the outer region of that probability of a magnitude 5 earthquake from the New Madrid fall.
And you're comfortable with that rating?
With their design, yes.
Okay. Any questions on that part? Okay, and then Joanna, we're gonna talk about how we're gonna finance it, and then you wanna talk about the,
Yes, so you had a memo in the packet that we sent out to you, and there's a copy of it today for Bob. So looking at, and if you go to the second page, we figured worst case with moving costs and FF&E, that we were probably looking at 33 million.
you're looking at this here, right?
Yes. If you look on the second page, Joe, there's a summary that yeah, that Bob did. And so before we would begin construction, we would have 10 million of that put away. And Bob is looking at 20 years of paying it out of the capital improvements tax.
How bad's that done to capital improvement revenue?
Average annual payment would be 1.6.
Where,
When you say capital, that comes out of capital, where does it come up? Tell me, explain that to me again.
He's looking at that at 1.6 million a year, he could pay for it out of the capital project sales tax.
What's the current revenues received from the,
if I'm reading this right, it's 68 million bucks. Is this the same, we're talking about the same pot of money as this, right?
Right.
So
And that,
in here, it shows for 2016, the budget's $68 million.
right, but part of that is what's saved. I think it produces, oh, Don's not in here, but I think it's around 11 million a year that we pull in.
Okay, if we're pulling in 11 million, then why are we spending 60 million a year? How the heck could that be? And that's just not this year, that's 16, 17, 18, 19.
we follow the federal plan?
No.
But what I'm getting, I guess what I'm driving at, 1.6 a year ain't too much if you got 68 a year coming in.
We don't have 68.
That's why we needed it. It's not 68 though. I'd have to go
No,
pull
you
my
had to look
budget.
at
I
the revenue
apologize, I didn't
side.
bring that with me.
Joanne, also one thing I'd like to talk about is if we're gonna take it out of capital improvement fund, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but we still need, I would like to see, and maybe Corey can help us with this, a more solid 5-year plan on our existing buildings, on what capital expenditures we're gonna have, instead of it being, the capital expenses that we saw on that are not specific and very broad. And we need to really have that considered, because those numbers are gonna start increasing the older as our inventory gets. And,
There's no doubt about it that I mean, a lot of stuff was new when we went charter or has been acquired and renovated, like the health building. And so we are going to be facing costs of having to deal with the renovation or just maintenance and upkeep of buildings. We've been trying to build accounts now in the plan that have to do with things like tuck pointing, parking lots, sidewalk care, carpeting, painting, all of those types of things. So we have individual accounts for those. I know you want to continue to see that become a much more robust plan where we're actually accounting building by building, and we're working on that. We're also trying to project out on roofs. As you know, we've been working actually at your suggestion and trying to figure out how long we can look at the Family Arena roof being in place, and brought a consultant in to look at that and have projected out, I think in 18, that we're gonna have to do some work on that towards
well,
replacement.
what I would like to see is a very specific plan on we're adding new inventory, which is a great thing, but we have to maintain the inventory we have. And, we had to push and shove to get this building done, get some grants and everything, which they did a great job, and that's all good. But then all the roofing, tuck pointing, HVAC, concrete, we have not had a 5-year master plan. I've asked for that for 2 years now, and you know that. And it's never been developed. And it's very broad and it's not very good. And I'd like to see, because I think the numbers are gonna start getting big on keeping up with what the inventory it is that we have. And I think it would only be fair for the council to know that these are what the expectations are to maintain the properties we have. It's gonna be $5 million a year, or it's gonna be $2 million, or whatever it is, so we can have the conversation. We can't just build new buildings and not take care of the buildings we have.
I completely agree, but I think we've done a lot towards that. I know it's not formatted in the way that you want, and I know that you prefer the school district formatting where building by building, they have each thing. And we're trying to move towards that, but we've accounted for many, many aspects of maintenance of the buildings, especially with regard to the equipment in them. I mean, Jim Erlander's worked out a very extensive plan on that we could have him come and present on if you want. I mean, that was way before me. He had done that some time ago. It's very well done, and we're trying to work that through on the building envelopes to make sure that we're accounting for issues at each of the buildings. So, we can come and present on that and talk about it if you want. Like I said, we're trying to move forward with going more towards the structure that you want with how the school district's doing.
Well, no, I'm just saying it's not just school districts, it's just people with multiple facilities have a 5-year plan, and I think Corey knows what I'm talking about.
Preventive maintenance schedule.
Yeah, preventive maintenance and capital improvements and on building envelope, windows, things like that, HVAC, everything that will break. Every building, all those kind of items are gonna have to be replaced eventually. And, you don't wanna just get into a ratty situation where all your buildings just look terrible and are falling apart. And then it becomes a big problem. Then you gotta do bond issues and everything else to take care of everything if you're not keeping up on it. That's all I'm suggesting. I mean, it's a conversation to have since we're talking about taking money out of that fund.
And I think the one building where we're gonna be most at risk on that, if we don't deal with it, is the corrections building.
Well, the Family Arena, I mean, that's a huge roof. That's gonna be over $1 million.
And I wasn't just talking roofs, I was talking buildings.
No, I know, I'm talking about the whole thing, and we just got that thing tonight, that's 100,000, or what is that, 100-something thousand? And so it accumulates to big numbers. The sheriff's department roof, that thing's failing, or the police department, sorry.
The sheriff's got a brand new roof, although he's one floor down. He's in the admin building, and he has a roof that's gonna last 25 years.
Okay, anyway, so you guys got any questions on that portion of it, on the financing end?
I do. Getting back to the 1.6, in recent years, I know we've been able to set aside 10 million, and that's fantastic. Have we basically been setting somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million a year to that? Or if we start doing this, how is this 5-year plan going to be affected?
We've been putting a little more than $1.5 million aside to prepare for this.
Okay.
So, and there are a few other smaller projects that, we've combined with this, where we had money set aside, so, but yeah, about that. And while Corey's presenting on that, I'll go over and pull my capital plan, and I'll give
So
you the
you
exact
saved
number.
up that 10 million bucks pretty quick, like 5 or 6 years?
Under 6,
Okay,
yeah.
and I don't want to get it wrong, I wouldn't,
3 years.
I'm looking to build a commercial building for my business in O'Fallon in the near distant future. And I want to work, when I rebuilt my building after tornado hit, I built it as strong as any building in O'Fallon. I wouldn't want anybody to be working in a building that was substandard, but St. Louis County's was pretty, and I don't think we need pretty. I'd rather see it really strong, like a bunker, okay, that's for safety for the folks so they can continue to operate. But I just did the numbers, not the stuff in it. You're at $500 a square foot for construction costs.
Yeah, they've got $681 on the bottom there for their construction costs.
Yeah.
But that includes,
Well, I just pulled out, I did my own math. I just pulled the building, not all the wiring,
Yeah.
the special wire and all that, just the building, 500 square foot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, I question that really a bunch. So,
they've also got a couple $1 million in there for between the FFE, the permits, the admin fee, and the utility infrastructure, which are above and beyond your typical construction. That's a big portion of it, yeah, but I've been diving into that
almost $1
quite a
million
bit.
for SCC capital administration fees. What's that for?
Do you want to get in on that right now?
I don't know, I just asked.
Let's roll.
It's $1 million.
All right, I was just, you want to talk about that now? Oh, no, I just wanted to get.
I mean, we can go into that later, but I mean, there's a
I
lot
thought
of,
that was in this.
Well, are we gonna go, you're gonna go through
No, the design build
This
is
is totally
separate from
different.
this project.
Yeah,
This was Ross and Birazini's estimate of our costs.
Okay.
So what Corey was talking about is he was largely concentrating on this 20,150,458 that was in the top part about the construction, and not so much looking at the technology or the miscellaneous. So
Corey, are you planning on, is this the budget, is this what we're running with, or what?
that's what Bob used as a worst-case scenario,
Okay,
plus money for moving in there the FF&E, anything else that we can think of. We were trying to think, what is the worst case? Not what do we think will happen, but what is the worst case?
okay, so Corey, what do you not like about this Ross and Birazini? Is there anything on here that you don't like, or does this look pretty good?
The actual building construction itself, the 9.5 million, that one seemed a little on the higher end to me.
For $500 a square foot?
Yeah, that's not 500 for that one, but yeah, that one's pretty high. But yeah, we're using this as a baseline and trying to improve from here. I don't want to take this and grow. I'd rather take this and make it smaller. And-
Okay, so with your construction methodology, let's go through this. Let's get rolling on this, because we're running out of time.
Okay. This starts out the design build versus the design bid build. Just kind of give you guys a definition to start out. The design bid build is our traditional route the county's been using. It's a traditional route that everybody uses. It's a separate responsibility for design and the construction. You have two separate entities that you contract with. You put out an RFQ for advertise to award the design work. After you get it awarded, they design it, and then you put out the design as an RFP, and you award that. So then you have two separate entities with two separate contracts to work off one another to build the job. And your increased pre-construction is the extra award and advertise and moving at a separate pace there. You have to finish one before you can complete the other. If you look at a design build is a single responsibility for design and construction. You advertise the project out there. You get 3 phases of the process. You get qualifications back for the design build team. It could be ran by a contractor. It could be headed by an architect. It's just however the teams are put together, but they're one separate entity or one single entity. You go through their qualifications. You put it on a weighted scale. You score their qualifications, and then you narrow it down to Oh, I'm sorry, we don't score that. We narrow it down from the original qualifications for 3 to 5 top groups that you want to select from. And those are the only ones you end up getting a proposal from. So you send those 5 back and they submit their design, which is going to be on a weighted scale. So then you look at their design and you scale that, you give them a rating 1 to 5 or whatever scale you've set up. And so you've looked at that before you've seen any budget numbers, anything. So you're kind of choosing your top contractor, your top qualified architect and engineers without seeing the budgets. Kind of gets that money out of your mind and makes you pick the best project for the county. Kind of
Based on just elevation drawings or footprints, or how do you do that?
No, it's, a lot of times they'll go through and they'll do like a third of the total design. When the way, Greg is gonna go through the actual process of how it's set up for the pricing and everything, but they have a 1% of the project as a stipend divided between these 3 to 5 guys as kind of a budget for them to use, and they actually usually go above that to put out their best proposal.
Taylor County's paying up to 1% to 5 of these people to present the presentation.
1% divided between however many you have.
St. Louis County said that they found in the 2 that they've done so far that about a third of the proposals, about a third of the work is done during this stage. And so what they're paying them by the 1% stipend that's divided amongst those that aren't chosen is a fraction of what they're investing in it. They've seen easily the winning groups putting $1 million into putting this stuff together to compete for this.
This is in effect them bidding for the business by doing
Right,
this.
right.
So,
Yeah, they submit 2 separate packages. One is the proposal and one is the proposed budget. So you open the proposal, you score it, you say, you know, this is my rating, here's how we're going to choose them. This guy got an 80, this guy got a 70. And then you go on to the next project, which is the price evaluations. So after you've given them their rating, you start opening those budgets, and those budgets are then rated. And your contractor is selected by a combination of those ratings. So it's not 100% based off budget or 100% based off proposal. It's a combination of the 2 based on a scale that you set before you put out the advertisement for the project.
Who makes that? Who's doing that? Who's interviewing the 5?
A group within the county. We'll have to set up, obviously myself, but there'll be, depending on what's in the project, it'll be people from each department that's touched by this project.
And that's the crucial piece, is that you get involved not only, you know, professional and finance, but that you get involved the users who are going to be in the building so that it's functional for what they're going to be doing.
How do you do cost containment in that? What's to keep everybody honest? Okay? Versus, you know, I know how a bid process works, but how do you do that? Once they're selected as the builder, what incentive do they have to keep costs from overrunning?
You could set a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price, in your contract. You can hold them, it's dependent on how your contract's written, there's multiple ways. You can hold them to the hard costs that they submitted to you and say that's your contract amount, and that's what it is. They have a...
Aren't they usually limited to a certain percentage that they can self-perform, and then they're out getting bids for the electric component? They'll bring it in and show you who the 3 that they select, the 3 that they went to.
Yeah, it's part of the proposals. Sometimes they'll submit a list of subcontractors, and then if they want to do any interchange, you have to let them know, or they have to let you know ahead of time. But there is, I mean, it's different contract to contract. I mean, if it's a wide scope, usually a design build is set up for a technical project that you're going to expect a lot of different entities to be a part of that.
Would this be easier a little bit if Greg maybe went through the layout of we've looked at the governments in Missouri that we've been able to find that have design build ordinances, and Greg came back and recommended that in terms of specificity, far and away St. Louis County is far more detailed and developed than the others. And so we were looking at that as a model. Do you want him to maybe go through that, and then you could come back and ask Corey questions once you kind of...
Isn't that similar to the process that Craig uses on some of the highway projects, where you
Sure.
get a bid, and if it's, you know, he uses a little bit more gravel, a little less concrete, they adjust the bill? Is it similar to that?
Well, I was gonna say, and I don't know how much different a building would be than a highway, but we had a great experience with MoDOT on the design build for phase 3 of Page. And our specifications, I don't know, Don, help me here. I mean, it was basically they had to connect, they had to at least have 1 lane or 2 lanes all the way out to I-64. And there was, you know, 3 or 4 other things we told them we absolutely had to have. And then we said, we got $100 million. Tell us what you can do for that money. That's why we were so pleased when we got it back, because we thought we were gonna get 70 or 80% of what we really needed, and we ended up getting about 95% of what we really needed. So is that basically the same principle?
That's where people get the term best value.
Yeah, and of course, the more requirements you put on it, the less flexibility they have, and the harder it is for them to save you money. But I mean, we would talk about, here's the most you can spend, it's gotta have, these 10 things, and then we'd go from there.
For example, the EOC, we'd give them a list of specifications with a space needs assessment saying, we need this much square footage for each department, but we don't tell them where it's at, how it's laid out. And then when they're doing their proposals, when you have your 3 to 5 coming in, you meet with those contractors every other week or every third week for 4 or 5 months while they come up through the design process until you have something that is ready for the deadline for them to propose. So it's not like you just give them this list and they disappear and come back with their proposal. It's a continued process with a group from the county, from myself, and then whatever departments would be involved to keep putting input in to help mold this thing in 3 to 5 different forms, so we have something to choose from.
How do you prevent the contractors from devaluing the quality of the project for higher profits after the contract's been written? You give a certain amount, because that happens a lot.
Value engineering.
Value engineering, that.
Yep.
And it only affects the long-term service life of the building on poor quality products like mechanical and, windows, roofing, all that kind of stuff. So how do you monitor? Because you cannot be an expert on everything.
Yep.
There's no way.
I'm glad you bring that up. Written in St. Louis County is a need for a consultant on the technically and complex projects. And you bring in a third-party consultant that you have on the side who is handling those complex ideas, complex things. It's typically another architect with his engineering firm. And he'll have, when a punch list process comes through, you're going to have an electrical guy, a mechanical guy, a plumbing guy. Well, we want to try to, on our design build team, we want to separate that out from those because we don't want them doing their own punch list. And then we don't see the actual punch list. We want to give them maybe our own punch list, give them something else. And then during the design process, we also have that third party, someone to overlook and to help give us any.
Who's the third party hired by?
Us.
By us. So that number would have to be a separate number.
Yes.
Than this, and it would be paid for directly by the county.
Correct.
So it would be like an engineering firm or something like that.
Correct.
Right.
It would kind of replace the architectural role in the standard historical standpoint, but you won't use them to the extent of reviewing change orders, reviewing pay apps. You only use them to the extent of their technical expertise.
So the 5 to 10% that's paid out to the architect on this project, $3 million or whatever it would be, where else is that going? Is that markup, is that $3 million, or let's just use that number, okay? Is that getting absorbed to by the general contractor to provide the architectural? Because you have to have drawings. Where does that cost go?
That cost is all part of the design build. The separate entity won't get 3 to 5% because he's not producing any construction drawings. It'll be a much lesser fee for him.
Yeah, it'd just be strictly design, and then how much money, what do you see as a consulting fee for something like this? What percent would that be?
It varies depending on how technical the project is, but it's anywhere from the 1 to 3%. Just, if it's an extremely complex project where it needs an electrical engineer there weekly, if it's going to be a communication center where it's going to be something that needs a lot of electrical input, or if it's less complex, the fee would be less. It varies from job to job. It
Are you
depends
going to
on-
have those numbers? When you start going through the process with the design build, are we going to have, how do you interview for the consultants too?
You put out an RFQ for the consultants, and you get their, just like we do typically, we get all their qualifications, and without seeing a number, we go through and see who's best qualified, and then you negotiate a fee with that consultant. So it would be something we put out an RFQ, get a response, and then submit their fee for approval.
And that's at the beginning of the process.
That is long
So that
before.
consultant is involved in preparing the specifications, and just as an example, I mean, part of your question was how do you hold contractor to it? You have good specifications. And St. Louis County's Health Department building was 22 million roughly, they told us, and they showed us a 1,000-page binder of their specifications for that building.
We've talked a lot about the advantages of a DB. What are the disadvantages, or is that further back?
Yeah, that's further back. That's all in here.
Okay.
Just, I'll finish up here. The single point responsibility, the opportunity, where am I at? I'm on a different page.
Next page.
The opportunity for innovation and faster project delivery, since you have one entity, if the architect comes up with something that needs to be involved in the project, he has direct contact with the contractor. It's something they can integrate immediately, something they can work on themselves. That goes on with the efficiency of design and construction expertise. The contractor bears all the risk of integrating the design changes since they're in charge of the design, and streamline contractor consultant interface. Since they're working together, it's
So Corey, what does justify an extra work order in that case?
actually there are fewer
There should-
drastically.
there
The
should
only
be.
thing that would be something along the lines of unforeseen conditions. Say you get into the ground and you find rock.
But it would only be ground conditions in this case, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it should be.
So there should
Because
be
they're,
no
they're in
extra-
charge of the design, they're in charge of
No,
integrating
I
it.
understand that. So the only extra work order would be ground conditions, maybe,
Or if we change the.
Yeah, the
Or we go
change
in
of
and
scope.
We
I
had
started to
something-
say that, and then I
scope
didn't want to
shift.
bring it up, but
Yeah,
yeah, if
scope
somebody
creep.
comes in and says, oh my God, we totally forgot.
no, I
We
get
need
that.
an office for
I
Jeff,
see, you know, the biggest advantage, I think, to what you're talking about is architects. A lot of times the construction guys will say, architects don't know, you know, they don't know what the hell they're doing.
They
And
point
then,
their fingers at each other.
the contractors say, this is how it really needs to be done, and then you got extra work orders.
Well, if you look at the next slide, fewer changes, implementing change simplified, and reduction in the number of claims. There it is. That's a big advantage here. We reduce the number of claims and we reduce the finger pointing.
Blame you anyway.
You know, it improves, as it says here, improves our risk management, and then the cost saving and more certainty of final price. When, on our traditional route, we put out an RFQ, we did get a design, and then we put out the design without knowing what the cost is gonna be until we actually get a hard cost. With the design build, we put out the specs for design saying, hey, this is our maximum budget. It has to be within this budget. If it's not within that budget, we don't accept it. So we're certain when we put the project out there, if we have a $30 million budget, we're at 30 million or less.
That's exactly what Mr. Allman just said.
Yep. So that's huge for us, where we don't say, oh, you know what? This design is $45 million, we gotta hire a new architect and redesign and absorb that cost a second time because we over-designed. That gives you your best value.
And that is the danger on, when you go out and you do a design and then you bid it, is that you know, the designers out there saying, oh, well, this is what it should cost you. And then the bid comes in and it's so far over what you can afford, and then you're sitting there saying, okay, we gotta go back and redesign this thing. Because we can't afford that.
I could just say we got $10 million budget and see if they can't make you a 40,000 square foot building with 10.
They can, but it won't be an EF4.
But I question that.
It'll be a first grade group of girls blowing on it.
Concrete's pretty
Huff
cheap.
and puff and
Yeah, three little pigs. The
bought
last one up there
concrete for $10 million.
I wanted to point out is the greater ability to evaluate contractors on factors other than cost. It gives us the huge advantage of, we see the contractor's proposal up front, the qualifications from the contractors. Before we select our three, we can say, you know what, we've had bad relationships with this contractor in the past, or he doesn't have the experience or the expertise, so we're not gonna let him do a proposal. On the traditional route, if he's the low bid, he's the low bid, and we have to rule him out for reasons other than bid if we don't think he's qualified. You know, this allows us to weed out the unqualified and unexperienced contractors up front. Kind of give us the best product at the end of the job.
St. Louis County told us it also, they've had a contractor who wasn't as big and they had a little question about, that made it through into the 5, and when they realized what the commitment was, they came back and dropped out. Because they knew they were never gonna get anywhere compared to the assets and abilities of some of the other people in the competition. They had some good ideas, it threw them into that, but they self-selected out by the 3rd meeting, I think they said, when they were going forward.
And let me answer that question that you're gonna ask is, his percentage of the 1% gets divided among the rest, we don't get to keep it. It's always 1%, no matter how many contractors make it to the end. Kind of keep it fair. So it's an incentive for them to have a better probability of having the job, and they get a little more in their fee to design.
And stay through the end.
Yep. I just put up the 2 key advantages that we were talking about. If you want to move on, we've got
Keep rolling.
I think they want to hear your.
disadvantages. We do have a little lack of project definition prior to project award or contract award. Since it is a design build and it's fluid all the way until the contract is awarded, we only have that 30% construction set or however far they took the proposal before we have a contract. So there's still a little unknown there when we have a contract what our final product will be. We still have the input like we normally would, but there's kind of that unknown there. The quality assurance, quality control is largely in the contractor's hand. That's part of why we have that third-party consultant to help separate that, to kind of mitigate that risk for us. We have reduced involvement in the design phase since we're not dealing one-on-one with the architect and creating a design before we hand it over, so there's a little less involvement from us. Comparing the designs up front, it takes a large commitment by the county. By the person in my role, by the people in the department's going to be affected. We have to have that commitment for them up front to be a part of all these meetings for the design, so we don't have, like St. Louis's EOC, complaints at the end. We want all their input up front to help create the design. And the consequences of the default on the contract are largely more drastic than when you have the design bid build. It's not like if you have the contractor default, you say, all right, he's this far along, we still have the design, bring in the next contractor, finish it. If he's 60% through the design and you're trying to gather all those designs and hand it off to another contractor and he's trying to figure out where he was headed with things, there's a bigger risk there for someone going default on the contract.
How do you let out money as the project, is there thresholds where the county would pay the contractor X amount of money? How do you
We
do
can
that?
set up thresholds where you have a schematic design fee, you have different design fees like you would your typical architect, and then you have milestones for construction that you have set up, and they'll submit pay apps, monthly pay apps, and we can go through and say electrical's 30%, so we're going to pay 30% of their electrical fee. In the beginning of the project, we'll have them submit a schedule of values from us or from them, saying they have this much in steel, this much in concrete, electrical, HVAC, and then they bill off that each month so we can track the percentage.
So they don't get too far ahead of us.
Correct. The goal is to make it so they're not ahead at all.
Now, Corey, are you going to be out there like in a trailer every day pretty much, or what?
At minimum, a weekly meeting out there on these larger projects. I already mentioned to Joanne, I may set up, if we do the EOC, I may set up do the EOC design build or design bid build. I'll set up a temporary office at the police station somewhere I can walk out of my office and go look at something if I have a question. On these larger projects, I think that's necessary.
Oh, I would say so, yeah.
How long do you think this would take from groundbreaking to being grand opening? A year?
Two to three, depending on how long it takes to get everything ran through the government.
There's going to be time, if we go design build, there'll very definitely a large commitment of time over 2016, maybe even into 2017, with coming up with that spec that goes out to the teams that compete.
It would be nice if while we were doing that construction period, that we could slack off on other projects to keep that young man out there, in my opinion. Plus, if you got $900,000 worth of permit fees to other entities for this building, I would hope that the inspectors from the fire department and O'Fallon and whoever else is out there do their job too.
Don't those inspection fees are you talking about permits and
It's in the
stuff?
thing, it was in
That
here.
was Russ and
It was in
Mary's.
Russ and
Oh,
Mary's,
we get that
900.
waived, right?
Some of them not. If they have cost involved in it, they're not going to waive their costs and do it for us for free. But if, we've tried to work with jurisdictions where it's not purely cost-based.
Oh, that's an O'Fallon? Or is that an O'Fallon? Is that what it is? Okay.
And can we not, since the 911
They do inspections on those.
is, and the emergency communications are collected, we're collecting a little bit back from all the jurisdictions that are using it. We cannot get any of the usage fees for this building paid by those entities? I think I asked you this before when we were at our.
They're already going to be paying subscriber fees to support the maintenance of the radio system. And they receive those fees, they've budgeted for them, they've looked at them long-term.
But the actual
So-
structure that encloses that, we can't charge them any fees to offset the 20, $30 million we're going to pay for this building?
I have to tell you, we should not.
Okay.
Okay,
Should,
so
could,
what,
it's two different things.
Now, that doesn't mean we're not gonna go look for every grant or subsidy, and you may not see plants growing on the roof of the place,
Right.
and we can get federal dollars to be green, but,
Okay.
I mean, we're gonna go out and, you know, if you all say, go forth, we're gonna come up with every dollar we can externally, but,
The two inspection people, Fallon and Fallon Fire, are both going to be using this building. Let's hope they give us a pretty good deal on the fees.
and we're hoping that they will cooperate with us. I know Fallon's been talking to us about the building. They've been very cooperative so far.
so what is it that you want from us at this point? Oh, Dave, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I thought legally, we're not required to comply with their Fallon building permit
Are you talking about our
requirements.
role as a county?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because we'd want our building inspectors to perform the inspections there.
Under the law, your health and safety-based requirements, we are not exempt from when we are within municipal boundaries. That does not mean on given projects, we cannot reach agreements with those entities,
Okay.
that we do the inspections, and the radio project is an example of that. But the default is they get to inspect and enforce their ordinances on health and safety issues. So the building code, fire code, those are classic examples of what they actually can enforce against the county.
Okay.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, I just point out that there's been situations where other jurisdictions have built within the unincorporated area of the county, and we did not waive the fee. Right.
Okay, Terry?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, so now you're gonna need, we cannot do this without passing an ordinance, is that
Right?
correct? So
We need an
have no.
ordinance for design builds.
Okay.
And that's why we're here really for two reasons tonight. One, we wanted to just update you and see, we got the impression from running through the master plan that you all were generally supportive, but we're farther down the road. I mean, we're starting at the cusp of getting to the point where we're gonna try to trim costs on things we don't like in the master plan, but there are some things in the master plan, like Corey noticed, there's insufficient office space for some folks. And we're building a building that's gonna be, you know, a 30 to 50-year lifespan. We don't want it sized for just the exact number of people we have today in certain areas. So we're at that stage, but the other big piece is that it's clearly going to be one of the most major building projects we'll be in for a very long time. And so we want to do it in the best way that allows us to control cost, control time, control quality. And from the research that we've done, we thought that that actually is going with the design-build approach. And
Okay.
so we wanted to, that obviously takes an ordinance. So if you guys are just opposed to design-build, there's no point in torturing you with bringing an ordinance up in front of you to put design-build into our ordinances. We can't do it without a change in
No, I
the
understand
ordinance.
that. Craig, let's move on. Can we go?
I just
Let me
want
give
to
a
ask a
little
question.
feedback real quick, though. I'm absolutely in favor of a DB on projects of this magnitude. It makes sense when we're doing more complicated, bigger projects. I don't think it should become our standard for all projects.
I agree.
I think you have to look at each one independently of the other, so.
Yeah,
That was my question.
My last slide there, design, build, useful and time-sensitive in projects with specialized and technically complex scopes of work. The design, bid, build are traditional, it's useful in the simpler projects that are budget but not schedule sensitive, unlikely to change. So I wouldn't say move everything over to it, but I think the larger ones and the more complex ones, like you just said.
So the ordinance that you would be asking us to pass would be
Craig wants to go over that real
would be
quick.
for this specific project alone, or
No, it would be to put design-build in
As a
the
possible-
ordinances.
okay.
But with back to what Terry's asking, would each project have to come to us to be performed as design build?
Yes.
or what?
Oh, yeah, always.
Yeah. All right, Greg, real quick, 5 minutes.
Real quick.
And then I need one minute to go back to Mr. Cronin's question.
Go down to that one.
Can you just go
Skip
through it
a
real
little
quick?
bit of this. Basically, I'm just going to talk to you about St. Louis County's ordinance. There aren't a lot of design-build ordinances in Missouri. I think this is the best one of them. I want to point out that Its use has to be specifically approved by the county council for each project. Now, then I'll just summarize what the process is under that ordinance. And there are really two reasons that I like and would recommend following what St. Louis County has done. First of all, it's already been used on 3 major projects. One of those was 141. It's a road. It's not directly comparable. But again, this is not just for the EOC building. This would allow use of the design build process in St. Charles County on other projects as well. 2, it was challenged by the St. Louis chapter of the American Institutes of Architects in St. Louis County Circuit Court. They fought it. They alleged it was contrary to state law and that counties were not permitted to do this. St. Louis County won. It's been upheld. The closer we stay to that ordinance, the better precedent that case is for us. The preliminary steps are key. Obviously, you have to have an ordinance in place to authorize this process, which St. Louis County has done. The whole process starts by the department or staff determining that that design build is an appropriate way to proceed with that particular project. You select a consultant. As I said, the county council has to also agree with that determination and approve design build for that project. The consultant, we've talked about that already, so I'll skip over that part. But the consultant is heavily involved in the preparation of specifications and then issuing a request for proposals for design build teams. Then it proceeds into really a 3-phase process. The first one is qualifications based only. So this is after you've worked with a consultant, issued your specifications, and advertised for proposals. In this phase 1, you're evaluating the qualifications of these design build teams only. You have an evaluation team of county staff, which we talked about, and then you determine your 5 most qualified proposers and invite them to proceed on. The next process, or the next phase then, can be a little misleading. Phases 2 and 3 are really done simultaneously, but they're 2 separate things. Phase 2 is your design criteria or your design submittals on the building. Those do not have any reference to cost. Those are opened and evaluated and scored before you ever open the Phase 3 submittals. But you get a score out of that under the St. Louis County ordinance can count for no more than 50% of your total point score. But if you do a project 50-50, your design score is going to count for half, and then your cost score is going to count for half. Cost comes in that Phase 3 submittal. Again, you don't open this until after you've scored the Phase 2s, and then that combines to give you your total score. So after that, you can also, in issuing those scores, either in design or cost side, you can take schedule into consideration as long as you, and basically you're setting up the rules for how you're going to score when you issue the when you issue the request for proposals to begin with at the very beginning of the process. And then we've talked about the stipend. So that is a brief summary of how the St. Louis County ordinance works.
Can I go back to your capital, because you really told me it was 68 million, but I think I figured this out, what you were looking at.
That's the entire
So,
project.
right, so, well, that's all of our
Everything.
funds, all
Right.
funds. So we normally pull in about 10, 10 and a half, 11 on the capital project sales tax. And we have at any point in time anywhere between about 10 and 13 million that is in our accrued, that's unspent from previous projects that's being rolled over. They may be multi-year
So
projects.
essentially,
And then you've got the special funds, highway,
Sure.
dispatch and alarm, all those.
the long and short of it, 1/6 of our capital sales tax money would go pay the bonds off.
If we can't
Approximately.
pull a single grant,
Right.
that's it.
Right. Yeah, so that's affordable, I would think. If you've been able to save that, you're saving that much every year that you've been saving up for the 10 million.
Right.
Another
We can put that
1.6 should work within existing budget numbers. Would you build this if this was your building with design build?
Yes.
Okay.
We need to break, so we can go to meeting.
Yep. We'll call this
Anything
adjournment
else
to
we
work
need to
session.
bring back to you? And I get a sense, I know you don't take action here, but is there anything else you all need to know before we bring you an ordinance or?
I'm fine with the design build ordinance. One thing I would like to know is, I'd like to him do a comparison with the cost of acquiring more land and building a one-story versus building a two-story in what we have now. Okay?
I'm good design building.
Yeah.